Good afternoon. It's Monday, the 11th of May 2015, just after 1 o'clock, and welcome to UK Column News. I'm your host this afternoon, Brian Gerrish. With me in the studio, Mike Robinson.
Afternoon.
And we're also going to be joined very shortly on live Skype link with Jason Holmes, who's in Sheffield, and he's going to be telling us about the recent demonstration against child abuse, which took place on Election Day. But before we bring Jason in, let's just remind ourselves of the weather. Quite incredible. We've actually got some sunshine across the country. Manchester apparently doing exceptionally well, cool and slightly overcast in Peterborough. Sheffield, I think, started a bit dull but is brightening up. And Plymouth at the moment, we've got pretty reasonably blue skies.
No. We've got milky grey skies.
We've got
the sun shining.
Milky grey skies. But the sun is shining apparently, but it's quite warm. So there we are. Maybe that bit of sunshine is the only good news we have as we go through politics in UK today. But let's start off straight away with Jason. Are you there?
I am here. Hello.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for joining us on the programme. It's really over to you. A demonstration took place on Election Day, which is highlighting child abuse. Tell us what actually took place.
Well, I think it was quite a last-minute organisation. It's a Facebook group called Yorkshire United Against Abuse group. That's what it's called. Yorkshire United Against Abuse, and it was a demonstration outside the council. It's essentially the same thing that we saw in Rotherham. It's now happening in Doncaster, and so I went along. I took a camera. I thought I'd get some footage of the event itself, because I think it's important for these small events get some sort of exposure. As we know, with events over the weekend, the mainstream media will not touch even a big demonstration, never mind a small one. But there was a couple of members of the press there from Doncaster Free Press and the Doncaster Star as well. I went along. There were around about 30 or so demonstrators. I got some footage, and I also got a very interesting interview with a couple of UKIP councillors who were taking time out of their election day to come along and support the event.
Did any of the mainstream media that were there, did they actually publish anything at the end of the day?
Yes, there's a couple of articles appeared in the Doncaster Free Press, and also it's called the Star. It's the Sheffield Star, but it has a Doncaster edition as well as a Rotherham edition. I think it was the Doncaster Star. They also did a small piece on the event itself.
And was it fair?
It seemed to be fair. Yeah, it was pretty balanced. I mean, they were basically reporting on what they'd seen rather than the issues.
Yeah.
Okay. Unfortunately, we didn't have time today to have a look at the clip of the interview with the UKIP candidates, but we will see whether we can get that live on another programme. What sort of reaction did you get from UKIP over the whole problem of child abuse?
Well, I spoke to a couple of the councillors that were there, a gentleman called Fred G and a gentleman called Paul Bissett, who both were re-elected, as I've just checked, and they were both re-elected. And they were saying that the people that were behind this were essentially scum and really needed to be stopped. But what they said the problem was is because it was a Labour-run council, it's very, very difficult for them to get anywhere, including there was an inquiry into a lady called Jackie Wilson, who I believe was involved in Rotherham at the time of the abuse scandal, and she was then moved to Leeds and is now in Doncaster. Now, the gist of what they were telling me is that there was an inquiry. They demanded an inquiry into her how she behaved throughout this time, and they said that when you actually read the report, there was a list of people that had been interviewed to compile this report, and there was most people who had refused to not to answer any questions, and I think it was 5 or so people that had and give them a glowing reference, was 5 members of her close friends and family. So it was quite a bit of a cover-up there going on in Doncaster. It seems like Yorkshire is a hotbed for this sort of thing.
Jason, that's a very interesting point. And of course, we know that from Sheffield, for example, where it's taken one person in particular, and that's Martin Brighton, has had to work for years to expose not only the fraud and corruption in Sheffield City Council, but also the fact that the abuse of children has been systematically covered up. And of course, what he came up against was the fact that the moment you started to ask the penetrating questions about what was going on, the whole of Sheffield Council closed down on him politically. So the reputation of the party was much more important than dealing with the child abuse. Why this is particularly significant, of course, now is that Sir Bob Kerslake was the big man in Sheffield while much of this was going on. He simply shifted across to become a major player at the head of the civil service. And so now you can see that you've got this political machinery able to start suppressing investigations into child abuse, suppress those actions at the very highest level of government. It is a shame that we've now seen local councils absolutely dominated by mainstream politics. Do you think there's any chance that the UKIP, or perhaps you've got some independent councillors who can break through this?
Well, there does seem to be some hope. I mean, there are people trying these issues and now being brought to the surface, and it's. The reason I went along was as an observer and to get some footage. Is I believe that these small demonstrations are the ones that they're happening in Liverpool, we've had them in Nottingham with Nicky Summers, there's ones going on in Manchester. And so I think these small demonstrations are actually waking people up, to the abuse that has been going on. There were several survivors at the demonstration, as well as supporters as well, and also you got a sense of community because there was also people from the homeless charity by basically going and buying things, blankets and stuff for the homeless. But they said they came up against the council, Doncaster Council's stance on homelessness is there is no homelessness in Doncaster, which is absolutely absurd. And the way that they can get away with that is if anybody goes for help who's homeless, he gets sent to Sheffield. So then Doncaster looks like it's got 0 homeless people. So it's corruption in all areas of government, and it is. I think it's what we've found is I think it's crept up from local to national because now we're now seeing the fruits of what the national government do, cuts in funding, all these things, and of course the local councils can then point to that and say this is the reason why we can't do any of these things, these inquiries. I think they spent £91,000 on the inquiry into Jackie Wilson. So they're spending money right, left and centre, but it's just whitewashing, cover up, and just obfuscation, I would say.
Obfuscation, totally agree with that. Also agree that these local demonstrations, peaceful demonstrations, I think are very powerful. And of course, what needs to happen is for them to spread across the country. We've already got the remains of the Labour Party and the Lib Dems, of course, now starting to really say, what on earth went wrong? Why didn't people vote for us? So just maybe there's a good opportunity now to ram the child abuse issue into the faces of Labour and the Lib Dems and say, well, you failed to tackle it and it's cost you at the election, whether or not that's actually true. But I think it's an opportunity to put pressure on. If you're able to stay with us, Jason, please do. We're going to move on through the news and we'll bring you in on a couple of issues.
Just mute your mic if you don't mind.
No problem.
Brilliant. Okay, well, staying with the child abuse issue, Metro here pointing out a headline here saying Margaret Thatcher secured knighthood for ex-Tory minister despite knowing he was a paedophile. This is Peter Morrison, who was accused of hosting sex parties for underage boys, and a former police bodyguard is alleging that Thatcher was aware of it in 1986 before the knighthood was awarded, and she went ahead and approved that knighthood. Now, of course, let's not forget that this is the same Margaret Thatcher that was hosting Jimmy Savile as a guest for Christmas dinner on several occasions. And of course, we still don't know who approved his knighthood. But Simon Danczuk told the Sunday People that what has become painfully apparent is that people at the top of government turned a blind eye to appalling sexual abuse by politicians. Well, he's saying that they're turning a blind eye. I don't think I agree with that. It's increasingly clear, I think, that they're actively covering it up, and that's an order of magnitude worse.
Yes, which brings us back really on the action there that Jason's just been talking about. Yeah. But of course, whilst we know that the problem with paedophile rings in the establishment political circles is fact, this is how the national press is responding. So we've got the Mirror here, making big of what is essentially an old story. This is a butcher who was caught with child pornography, and the rehash of this story is that he's been sneaking back into work, and they feel that this is back as a national story. So the Mirror doesn't do any reporting on the abuse of Holly Gregg or the imprisonment of Robert Greene, or the widespread cover-up of abuse in the Scottish establishment. We just focus on a butcher because that's okay. Well, what are they trying to hide? Well, what better person to bring on screen than David Cameron? The BBC fawning over Cameron's appointment of Michael Gove as the Justice Secretary, the minister there. And why would Cameron do this, and why would the BBC get so excited? Well, if we bring in Mr. Gove's smiling face, what's special about this man? Well, it's pretty straightforward because, of course, he was the person who said we should definitely not have any form of investigation into a possible cover-up of paedophile politicians in Westminster. And he was busy spouting that back in July 2014. And now all of a sudden he gets made the most powerful man as far as justice, so-called justice, is concerned.
A safe pair of hands, huh?
Well, I just wanted to say a blatant Westminster paedophile ring cover-up. I mean, it's
just in your face.
It's in your face. We'll give you just a quick comment on that bit, if you like, Jason. I don't know whether you were aware of that Gove appointment.
I wasn't. Because of the election, I've just sort of stayed away from mainstream politics. So I didn't really know that. But what I can say is that the obvious, in-your-face cover-up of child abuse and these paedophile rings in Westminster is absolutely abhorrent. And if people knew, if it went mainstream, the riots over the weekend, or whatever you call them, the demonstration, the protest, would be small fry.
Yeah. Well, okay, we'll add a bit to Mr. Gove, of course, because Mr. Gove is a strong Zionist. He's been on public stage in London saying that he's a dedicated Zionist. So not only have we got this very interesting man, Michael Gove, but he's, like David Cameron, said that his allegiance is to the political system in Israel. But of course, he's also stood alongside Lord Janner. So here we are, a very young-looking Michael Gove with an anonymous young lad by his side. But there's the all-important face of Lord Janner. And of course, we've got, I think, 78 MPs at the moment campaigning that he should be brought into court.
78 is the latest figure.
Yeah, I believe
that's
so.
Out of 650.
Yes. Well, okay. I mean, you don't want too strong an effort. But here's a Guardian article just reinforcing this point that Michael Gove is a proud Zionist. Well, in the background, of course, how does Cameron really deal with the subject of child abuse? We're just going to remind people that abuse victim Melanie Shaw is still inside the profit-making HM prison Peterborough. She's been there now again for, I think it's 2 months. She's been charged with falsely imprisoning a medic who came to see her when she'd been released from court after the last hearings. And of course, Melanie was in a very distressed state for several months. She got no help from the local authorities or social services in Nottingham, but she's now been accused of imprisoning the medic who supposedly came to assist her. There's some very interesting rumours that the medic is in a relationship with a Nottingham police officer, and it's been suggested to us, not confirmed in any sense, but suggested that perhaps that police officer was involved in one of the arrests of Melanie in Nottingham city centre. So there we are. If you want to support the Tories, at least you know that they've got a definite policy on child abuse victims. Get them locked up in prison. What went wrong then, Mike?
Yes, the election continues to rumble on. So Financial Times, pollsters must explain why they got the election results so wrong. So they continue to push this nonsense, this disbelief that the polls could have got it so wrong, which of course they didn't. The polls expressed the view of the electorate, and they didn't take into account the postal vote fraud alleged. But what was very interesting now is that we seem to have an official coming out and potentially going as far as to suggest the same thing. Scrap postal votes or elections will be fixed. This is an article in the Mail, and this is Judge Richard Harvey, who is talking about. He is. I found it quite interesting what the Mail has said here. He presides over electoral fraud, is what they said in their subheading there. In fact, he's in charge of hearing cases of electoral fraud. Maybe he does preside over it. I don't know, but that's we need to talk to the Mail about that. But anyway, he's a deputy High Court judge, and he highlighted on Radio 4's File on 4 programme that in one case last year he had come across 14 different ways in which postal votes can be manipulated, and he said postal voting on demand. This is the new system where basically people can just postal vote without any sort of checks and balances. However, many safeguards you build into it is wide open to fraud. It's open to fraud on a scale that will make election rigging a possibility, and indeed in some areas a probability. In the past, when you had personal voting, that is to say voting at polling stations, there was fraud, but frankly it was minuscule. Postal voting on demand has enabled fraud to be carried out on what, in one case, I described as an industrial scale. Well, I am going to suggest that that's exactly what happened in this election, industrial scale voting fraud. And as I tweeted out on Friday, perhaps if we asked for the postal vote result for each constituency, asked for the details of that under Freedom of Information, we might find some interesting coincidences.
Absolutely. It was very interesting that phone calls were apparently being made to individuals in the Plymouth area by the Labour Party, we understand. They were concerned about what was happening with postal votes. So the suggestion was there was enough concern within the local Labour Party. They were starting to make phone calls to find out whether people had submitted a postal vote or not. And there was even a very bizarre suggestion that there were bags in the local post office. Sorting office, bags of votes. Not substantiated, but very interesting local rumour. But not to worry, because we're going to get tough with the EU, apparently.
Well, frankly, I'm not going to say anything other than rubbish. That's really all there is to say about this. More propaganda, really. But I'm fascinated because obviously David Cameron talking about post-election stuff, we're going to get tough with the EU, but we're also going to get tough with human rights, he says. Now, I just wanted to highlight this article, which was published last year. This Kitty S. Jones here asking some questions. Human rights establish a simple set of minimum standards of decency for humankind to hold on to for the future. That's one of the points that she makes, and I'm really going to make the point that that's not quite the case, because, of course, under the British or any common law system, we have the concept of unlimited, inalienable, God-given rights, which are not human rights. And, of course, human rights are specifically there to restrict our rights. And she goes on to say, what kind of government would want those basic protections for citizens overturned? And she answers that by saying, one that doesn't value or wish to uphold the universal protection of its citizens from the state. But in fact, human rights don't give a universal protection for citizens in any case, because they limit rights. In any case, it's not government's job to protect our rights, it's our job, and we've got to continue to hold government to account, or begin holding government to account. And I just want to ask the question, why are we accepting the limitation of our rights that human rights legislation represents? So I'm not saying that that Cameron is doing the right thing here by getting rid of the British human rights legislation, because of course if you leave a vacuum, because at the same time they're trying to destroy the British Constitution, if you leave a vacuum then you're left with no protection whatsoever. But nonetheless, what was being highlighted in this article was a report called Dignity and Opportunity for All, Securing the Rights of Disabled People in the Austerity Era, and Jane Young was the lead author of that, and it was exposing the coalition at the time's failure to meet its international human rights legislation under UN Convention on the Rights of People with Disabilities and various other conventions. And they were saying that the UK government seems to be the first to face a high-level international inquiry initiated by the United Nations Committee because of grave and systemic violations of rights of disabled people. Well, we know that disabled people are increasingly coming under pressure, along with the elderly, with regard to health service provision. But frankly, it isn't going to end with disabled people. Any minority. It's pretty much tantamount to 1930s Europe, if you ask me, 1930s and 1940s.
Well, actually, we've had one or two reports in the mainstream press over the last few days, which are actually talking, I think it was one of the Mirror journalists talking about a democratic dictatorship. Pretty interesting turn of phrase.
Right, and of course, we're beginning to see the effect of, okay, the policy hasn't been implemented because the legislation hasn't been removed yet, but clearly the policy exists, and we begin to see more trouble at demonstrations. So last week we were highlighting the fact that many countries around the world are removing the right of people to gather in groups, and certainly in this country it seems that the police are behaving ever increasingly badly, and in this case, you know, it has resulted in 4 police being injured. Well, I think we're going to see a lot more of this kind of thing over the summer.
Yeah, indeed. All of the pictures in the paper, of course, were showing that a lot of those demonstrators were masked, bottles thrown, cans of beer, etc. So police injured, as Mike said. Jason, the demonstration that took place on election day that you were involved in, of course, had none of those attributes to it. It was a peaceful demonstration. Just any general comments on this subject of what these other so-called demonstrators get up to?
Well, it's difficult. There's always going to be people from the police that are going to try and start bother, get it kicking off. But the point I wanted to make on the election itself was how fickle the Scottish people must be, because only less than a year ago they voted with the Conservatives and Labour to remain part of the Union, and less than a year later they've completely wiped them out and they're done with the SNP. So I just wonder what's going on there. It seems to be a bit of a smoking gun for electoral fraud in some way, whether it was a referendum or the election result itself.
Yeah, I mean, again, there are many people commenting on how this result can have taken place, but you know, I'm certainly alleging that there's been underhand shenanigans going on, and perhaps it's not a genuine result. But Scotland absolutely demonstrating itself to be a one-party state at the moment, and when you take into account the pretty nasty stuff that's being driven through by the SNP at the moment, and also, to get back to an earlier point, the fact that the SNP absolutely requires that all their employees, if you like, all the people that are representing the SNP in various government formats, are all required to hold the party line under they've got no excuses for doing anything else, and therefore they have no loyalty to their people, they have no loyalty to the nation, they don't have any loyalty to Scotland, they only have loyalty to the SNP. And that's a pretty dangerous situation when the SNP form such a large power bloc in Westminster and also in Holyrood, and when they are in control of one police service and one judiciary. Pretty scary.
Yeah.
Essentially a dictatorship in Scotland.
Absolute.
Well, that's the word, and thank you for giving us that, because we're going to move on a little bit to the creeping dictatorship in UK. Of course, it's remarkable that the moment Cameron's re-elected, Theresa May's been calling for a big push to get the so-called Snoopers Charter in place. It was the Lib Dems who effectively blocked that. Now the Tories are back in. She wants to snoop on ordinary people in UK. We've got the demonstrations that heads us towards Civil Contingencies Act. And the other thing to do is to get people fearful. So what better than, of course, overseas terrorism and ISIS? We want to draw people's attention to this utterly bizarre report by the Daily Mail on the totally bizarre topic of what MI5 has been up to. Now, this article is essentially saying that MI5 is launching, here it is, let's highlight it, an ambitious campaign to recruit intelligence officers to convince thousands of jihadi extremists, very strange expression, it is monitoring to spy for them. So we don't know whether that's a real MI5 phrase, or there's a bit of confusion in the print run of the Daily Mail.
But they're acknowledging that there's spying, that they are monitoring thousands of people.
To spy for them. Yeah, monitoring to spy for them. And then we see the accuracy of the report, because if we bring this one in here, it says a staggering 700 Britons are thought to be fighting. So it says the number is a staggering 700, but then there's the word thought, think. So there's absolutely no certainty with this report. And if we get into the next bit, of course, there's the magic phrase. It says an estimated, should come up on screen, I think, as it come up, an estimated 300 have already returned to the UK. So we don't know how many are fighting, and we don't know how many have returned to the UK. But what we're going to do is this. And where are we? Should come up. Here we are. It says that these recruited MI5 handlers will learn how to elicit information and deploy persuasion and negotiation to find the truth and gain life-saving intelligence. So they're going to deploy persuasion. Well, of course, persuasion could be waterboarding, which the British government's clearly been involved in. But we're going to get the truth from MI5.
Is that what they're doing, or are they attempting to get in among these groups in order to actually foment more problems?
Well, I'm going to guess, Mike, they're trying to do both, and I'll lead into that. So thanks for that prompt there. Let's have a look at this. Well, of course, this was the Lee Rigby murder, and here we've got Mr. Rifkin. Now, he was at the time chair of the Intelligence and Security Committee. There was clearly very dubious stuff going on around this whole affair, but he tried to blame the internet companies for the murder of Lee Rigby. That was the Mirror article. They picked him up for it. But let's remind ourselves of what the UK column did at the time. We took people through the detail. So here are the two people concerned. I'll bring them in. But we've got Michael Adebolajo. Now, he was raised as a Christian, and the other one was Michael Adebowale, also raised as a Christian. And, of course, these met at Greenwich University. But over on the left-hand side, Mr. Adebolajo was actually friendly with a Lance Corporal in the British Army, Lance Corporal Kirk. He was subsequently killed. But no signs that this young man was a problem at all. But the story goes he's recruited by MI5 at university to infiltrate groups. He goes off to look for Al-Qaeda in Somalia. He gets arrested in Kenya. Then the family are claiming that he was tortured and was being pestered by MI5 to such an extent that in 2012 he had to contact a lawyer over that harassment. And if we go through the other side, well, we've got the other gentleman. He becomes involved with Nigerian and Somali gangs, apparently. But this is the key part of the story. He ends up in Feltham Young Offenders Institute, where he converts to Islam, but he also suffers a personality change. This was reported in the Mirror. It says that he was radicalised while he was in the Offenders Institution. Suddenly that story was taken off the internet, but even the BBC reported that MI5 was described as harassing and sponsoring the torture of people in Kenya. So who was in charge of this mess? Well, that brings us back into Rifkin. We're talking torture, mentioned on both counts for these two. And of course, Rifkin, who defended MI5, is later sacked over his dodgy, I think is the mildest term we could put on it, business deals. So are we the only people to pick up on this? Well, this is a report from some time ago where the police were accused of spreading fear after issuing what many said was spurious terror advice. So they pushed out a leaflet saying you need to be very frightened on your way to work. This was mainly for police. And it took a UKIP councillor, Lawrence Webb, to say that this was just about spreading fear amongst people. So I think what we're looking at here is the fact that this is a deliberate attempt to get people fearful about what's actually been going on. And let's remind ourselves, private company ACPO pushing out this together with, well, there you are, Jason, Police Scotland, part of the police dictatorship. David Cameron, of course, got on the bandwagon. He said, well, it's all so serious, I've got to give 130 million to the security agencies. So this is what he came out with. And all these people are using the internet, so we need to clamp down on the internet. What we said at the time was it was a scam report to heighten fear while increasing state surveillance on the individual. And I think we're going to stick with that. But we'll also bring in his latest missive, and that is that David Cameron is apparently very upset at extraordinary biased BBC coverage of the election campaign. According to the Telegraph, anonymous Tory spokespersons are saying, well, basically it was full of Labour bias. What do you make of that?
It worked then.
It worked. It destroyed the Labour. Well, yeah, okay. It's a bit tricky.
Yes.
Well, how are we going to counter this? We need to get people active. We need to get the truth out by all available means. So I'd just like to, first of all, remind you that there's a grand jury workshop coming up. This is between Guy Taylor and Kay Holloway from the Peacekeeper movement. And they're going to be looking at common law and how people can learn about their common law rights and, of course, how people can stand together. And then if we go to a slightly different route for getting the truth out, AV6 is coming up and we'll give Ian Crane and his good work a bit of a boost here.
So I've been watching and 9/11 was just an incredible mind control event. You know, it was apparent to me then, as it is today, that people are literally mind controlled, that they're not actually thinking for themselves. Most of us are simply regurgitating.
We live in a bubble, and a lot of times until you remove yourself from that bubble, you don't even know you're living in a bubble, in a kind of an information prison in the West.
But these guys have got a lot of money, and we complain about McDonald's and all that sort of thing. Do you know why they've got so much money? Because we fucking buy their shit. So it's time to stop it. You know, people say to me, where do we go? What's the first step? Stop supporting the companies that don't give a shit.
Be who you are. Don't police your thoughts and don't police your expression. Express yourself, you know, but work for something positive. Express yourself in a positive way, you know. Create a better world because you're in it. Now, what is your legacy that you leave behind? Is the world better because you were here? Or is it worse because you were here? Or did you just not participate? You know, because you have to participate, you really do.
Right, so Sorry, just want to
That's okay.
mention one more name that isn't on that list, and that's you, in fact.
Indeed.
And apparently, so it looks like Brian is going to be opening the event on Saturday morning. I just want to also mention that Max Egan and Samantha Bachman will be on tonight's Crane Report at 7:30 on ukcolumn.org/live. Then there'll be the repeat of this news in between that and Fracking Nightmare at 9 o'clock. So hopefully we'll see you later on the live stream.
Okay, we'll say well done, Ian Crane, for putting this event together. And of course, one of the good things that Ian has achieved is starting to get people from different sectors of the truth movement to come together to support each other. Of course, a lot of that was based around fracking. Well, if we're having to go to alternative means to get the truth out, let's remind ourselves of the I think it's called a snake's wedding that David Cameron was involved in only a few months ago in his attempt to get the press and media effectively under government control. So just a diagram there showing all of the components that were coming together around the Conservatives to take control of the media and mainstream television. So we've got the input from ex-KGB billionaires through Lebedev into the Journalism Foundation. They were, of course, working with Common Purpose, with roots in the Marxist Demos organisation to form the Hacked Off and Full Fact campaign, which led to Leveson. And what did Mr. Leveson want to do? Well, state control of the press and media. And that was all part, of course, of David Cameron's big society. What is that big society? Based on the work of the Marxist Alinsky. And of course, David Cameron made sure that before the election, well before the election, he took down all of the original promises from the Conservatives about the type of society they were going to produce. And we'll also bring in, of course, Ken Clarke there. Ken is in fairly warm water at the moment, all matters to do with Nottingham. But what has he been advocating? Well, he wants more secret courts. So if you're going to build a dictatorship, you need the media under state control. And of course, you certainly don't want juries in courts. Well, that leads us nicely back to the Justice Minister. And here he is, Michael Gove. And of course, back in 2014, he calmly went public and said that he would be quite happy if a Revolutionary Communist Party member was the boss in Ofsted. So this man, in addition to supporting Zionism in an overseas power, would be quite happy to have a revolutionary communist effectively managing standards in British schools. We're not making it up, but I have to tell you that the Express seems to be making this up. Extraordinary story, just blatant propaganda of a small YouTube clip which supposedly shows a Prince Harry fighting for rebels in Ukraine against the Russians. Do have a look at this story on the Express. It is so childish and pathetic in its propaganda output because in the video the man clearly says the gentleman's name in the trenches there is Gary. He does not say it is Harry, but this whole thing is spun by the Express in order to, I think, show our support for those fighting the Russians. Interesting.
Unfortunately, we're not really in a position to fight anyone, and this is increasingly clear. Unfortunate accident in Seville of an Airbus A400. Now, this is the I believe this is the replacement for the Hercules, and it's a 4-engine turboprop transport aircraft. And I believe what happened here was that Airbus were testing. It's assembled in Seville, and they were testing an aircraft. It was his first flight that was going off to Turkey, and unfortunately they had an accident. This resulted in the UK grounding all A400 aircraft, and you know. I'm very sorry for the people involved in this, but aircraft crash from time to time, and we don't see too many fleets being grounded as a result. But the A400 fleet right across the world, the ones that are operational, seem to have been taken out of operation as a result of this accident. And you've got to ask why. In the meantime, We've got Sir Nick Harvey here. Now he was member of Parliament for North Devon until Thursday. He lost his seat to the Conservative Party. He was Minister of State for the Armed Forces from 2010 to 2012. And after he lost that position, he was knighted as a payoff, I suppose. I don't know. But anyway, he is absolutely criticising the F-35. We have had things to say about this aircraft in the past because, of course, this is the aircraft which is not going to be delivered in time for deployment on our aircraft carriers, the two new ones which are being built. And it's also got other roles as well, which it isn't going to succeed in because it doesn't really fly terribly well. It's also finding itself grounded quite a lot. And he has actually gone ahead and saying that he doesn't recall having heard anyone suggesting that these things could be used in combat before 2020, and calling it, as you can see there, one of the biggest white elephants in history.
So we scrap, albeit an older generation aircraft. The British Harrier gets, well, in fact, sold off dirt cheap and scrapped, taken off the aircraft carriers. We leave the aircraft carriers without any fighters. We then put in the contract for this American aircraft. It's a white elephant.
So we've got no carrier-borne aircraft for a number of years, and as well as that, one of the other roles that this aircraft was supposed to provide was to replace the Tornado fleet, and that isn't going to happen on time either. So we're going to end up with no Tornadoes and no replacement for Tornadoes. So it really is a complete decimation. And in fact, there are rumours that the whole F-35 project could be cancelled.
Yeah. Well, we've been hearing that there are more cuts on the way for British Armed Forces. We're talking about another 30,000 service personnel to go. Huge cuts, many senior military people now getting extremely worried. Of course, they're puzzled because they got David Cameron on the world stage saying Russia is a huge threat and we should be countering that. But with his other hand, David Cameron has been doing this. So he's been cutting through the armed forces. RAF cuts could make Britain's air space vulnerable to attack. Well, that's putting it mildly. He's been scrapping the carriers. And of course, he's been scrapping the Nimrod maritime surveillance aircraft. And there have been one or two senior army people standing up saying what's been going on. We said many months ago, if you want to destroy Britain, vote Conservative. And of course, we were totally spot on.
Yeah.
So this is the extra bit of the story, because the Express here spinning that David Cameron is doing well because he's going to spend $2 billion now replacing the very Nimrod maritime reconnaissance aircraft that he scrapped a couple of years ago. So he's going to spend $2 billion on a fleet. I believe it's 12 aircraft. We got rid of the Nimrod. Many of them said it was old, but the upgraded one, which is this aircraft here, we'll show you a picture, was performing extremely well. Of course, this was a British industrial project, so it would have produced British jobs, and the aircraft was flying and performing well. David Cameron scraps it. And this is one of many articles you can find online from the Defence Industry Daily saying this was madness to scrap the Nimrods. We needed them. They did a good job. And if, as David Cameron said, the Russians' submarine threat was so great, we could not possibly survive with a gap. Well, here is a £1 billion UK upgrade programme that had been completed. It was successful. In set there is a picture of yet more British aircraft simply sent to the scrapyard by David Cameron. I'll just give you a 30-second response there, Jason. To us, we're nearly lost for words as we watch David Cameron simply destroy this country.
Yes, and for a country like ours that we expect a terrorist attack at any moment, and for some people to be invading us and blowing us up and things like that, the fear porn that we get, it seems strange that he's decimating the armed forces and the things that could protect us if we needed to go into the theatre of war. As you say, with all the cuts that are happening and all the things that have been scrapped, then we're reliant on other people. which is terrible for a nation such as ours.
Well, I'm going to gently say to you, I'm not surprised, because we've reported now for years that the objective of the combined LibLabCon was to destroy Britain by subversion. So you say publicly one thing, you're creating jobs, but what you do with your other hand is destroy manufacturing. We're going to comment a bit more on the military side and also what Russia and the Chinese have been up to tomorrow. But we're going to thank you for coming on with us. Please keep active with the good work. We believe that if we can get the lid off child abuse within the establishment of UK and certainly Westminster, if we can expose these criminals and perverts to the wider general public, we're going to be well on our way to getting a proper rule of law and justice back into the country.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you for joining us, Jason.
Thank you.
Any announcements, Mike?
No, we've done them, so that's it.
We've done them. Okay, we'll leave it there.
Oh, yes. Well, just one announcement, actually. Just before we go, just want to say to everybody that if we are quite happy for people to take content off the UK Column website and republish it elsewhere, but if you do so, please at least give us an attribution. We don't want to see stuff taken from the UK Column website and published under somebody else's name. That's not fair.
With no credit, basically. Yeah. And I'll just say, because there's been one or two comments coming in about the cost of events, whether they're from the British Constitution Group or the AV series of events. I think there's a perception that when these events are put on, because they're quite big, there's a lot of activity, a lot of speakers, that this means automatically there's a large amount of profit. Well, I think a few people might be quite shocked to know how difficult it is to even cover the costs on these sorts of events. But we still believe in trying to put them on because, of course, it does produce a lot of good quality debate, presentations and video work. But if you're there having a snipe at the people who do all of the work to put those events on, I think you need to understand that usually they just about cover costs or maybe give a very minimal profit, which always gets ploughed back into future events. So sorry to be a bit tough there, but it does take a lot of work to do what we all do. That's it. We will be back same time tomorrow. In the meantime, enjoy a bit of that sun, and of course do talk to your friends and neighbours and anybody else you meet about the criminals running Britain. Thanks very much. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.